Welcome to the 44th edition of Women's Wrestling Weekly, the show, joined as always by Harvard's finest, Scott Beck. And let's break down real American Freestyle, two women's matches. One was anticipated that we didn't get. It was a replacement with MMA legend Holly Holm. I still wanted to see Kennedy Blades. That's why I'm tuning in, because she is the excitement. Don't know why it didn't work out. They tried to explain it. It sounded like there was maybe some NCAA hangups, which is funny because we're in the NIL era and it seems like it's the Wild West right now with allowing athletes to do what they want. But no Kennedy Blades. Holly Holm steps in, gave a good accounting of herself. But if you watch the match, you just saw some choppiness. You saw why wrestling is different than mixed martial arts. But it was interesting to see someone who definitely dabbles in wrestling goes into wrestling after being in mixed martial arts. So kind of a reverse mixed martial arts to wrestling, but she lost the match, but had a 4-point throw in there and gave a good accounting of herself.
Yeah, well, she's a competitor, Holly Holm, and you don't see it that often, like that reverse an MMA person that kind of wrestles actually doing a wrestle match. So it was kind of interesting. Yeah, and I don't know, the concept of there being an NCAA issue, and as you said, it is like the Wild West. It's kind of funny, and Sarah won dominantly, maybe a little rust perhaps, but Sarah's Sarah, and she looked pretty good. To me, the biggest surprise was Evan Wick beating Jason Nolf. That seemed like I wouldn't have expected that. I don't know how much Nolf has been wrestling or not. I don't know if it's a size issue or not because he doesn't normally wrestle up there. But who knows?
Conceptually, I thought they did a nice job. As we talked about last time, no professional wrestling league has ever been able to find the formula to pull it off. I think that this was a good start, and I think it's promising. I think they did some of the right things to elevate the product, bringing Chael Sonnen on, bringing Kurt Angle on, getting some hype into it, having the foresight to get a replacement for Kennedy Blades, even though it would have been nice to see her. So I give him high marks for getting this off and running, and it feels like this could get some momentum and carry itself moving forward. I don't know what kind of funding it's going to take, but good job on a good start.
Yeah, the math on this stuff has always been difficult. Hopefully, somebody's figured out the formula and this will work. I think it's good to give wrestlers an opportunity to make a little dough and get a little more exposure. We'll just have to see. Yeah, and to be completely honest with you, yeah, I would like to watch Kennedy Blades wrestle because she's always exciting. But we have the World Championships coming up in a couple of weeks. And you don't want to risk an injury, in my opinion. So I don't love, some of the men that are competing in Worlds, Real Woods, and others, but competed. But I don't love it timing wise. So I'd rather, at least in this pass, see a healthy Kennedy Blades, hopefully, and at her best for Worlds.
Definitely want to see that because the end game is to win that world title. Because as much as you hype this up, you still want to get that world gold medal against the best of the best in that format. And we want a healthy Kennedy Blades because I want Kennedy Blades to win a world championship. And I think she can win a world championship and she has the skills to do it. It would be nice to have the oohs and ahs and to let Fox Nation
Yeah.
and Real American Freestyle see the magnificence that is Kennedy Blades and what she can do to that type of audience. But I think we'll get there and she'll get her chances.
Yeah, and although Kennedy Blades is an Olympic silver medalist, she's down a couple weights, at 68. There's a lot of work to do here. This is a tough tournament. All the weights are, some more stacked than others. We'll do a complete world preview next week with Reese Larramendi on again. Looking forward to that. But 68 has some tough competitors. Ishii from Japan's a world champion. North Korea's in there. Believa from UWW, Toussaint's a world champ from Turkey, Zelenik from Romania. I mean, there's competitors at the weight class. She's got work to do. I mean, I in my mind, she's a favorite. Zhumanarova from Kyrgyzstan. I mean, there's competitors. So, to me, if you're going to miss one of these things, hopefully, if she wants to do this in the future, they can work out whatever the issue is. And I'd love to see her because she's certainly excited. But timing-wise, I didn't love it.
We'll go deep into a weight by weight, as you said, with Reese Larramendi, but just generally thinking about what's going to happen conceptually going into the 2025 World Championships, even though Japan, oddly doesn't have its A team, they are still the favorite, overwhelming favorite. So it's the race for second place. And when you look at the United States, you say we have some spots where you have a Helen or you have a Kylie Welker, Kennedy Blades that you know that's a proven entity. Still, what team is going to get second place? And as we've really looked into it, you have good teams like India is still young. They look good at the age levels. You have China, you have North Korea, but it still feels like the United States is in a good position to get second place at this point, not knowing exactly what every country is going to look like.
I mean, we'll get into it, but there's unknowns. I mean, India is sending a young team. Other than like Anthem, who's actually young at 53 and a proven quantity. But there's a lot of the people that we just saw wrestle in the U20s are going to be competing on the senior team. They had at 76 they had a world champion, Priya, a U20 world champion who took second this time, so she didn't defend her title. She lost in the finals, but she's tough, but it's a young team. China, I don't, so they're using this as a time to kind of like where we kind of are in certain ways. We have transitions, we're new at, in terms of Jimenez at 50, and then, this is Taylor's first world team, even though I wouldn't call her, rookie. She's been around for a long time. 55 Rodriguez is younger. So we have a young team as well. I think we have, as you said, some more like seasoned names. And, again, we'll get into that when we do the deep dive. But, India's got a young team. North Korea actually has an experienced team. If you look, I don't, it's very tricky to look up, by the way. India and North Korea are very tricky when you try to do a dive on UWW because the spellings don't always transition perfectly. So there could be somebody, India uses two of the first name, in many cases, even though the person does have a last name. Many people have the same name. There's multiple spellings. And it's the same thing kind of with North Korea as well, where there's a lot of common last names. You could have a lot of, Parks, Chuns, and things like that. And then you don't know with the nuanced spelling of the first name. So it's hard to really look it up fully. But I can tell you, North Korea is good in the lighter weights. They have a lot of, Asian champions, Asian silver medalists who either might have beaten Japan or lost to them, in this year's Asian Championship. So they're sending a team that looks pretty solid. China's got some steady hands and some new names as well. So this is just like what we're kind of doing where you transition, there's new names. So it's going to be tough. Ukraine's got a pretty seasoned team, I would say, as well. And if they perform well, they could be contending for a second or third place. So, obviously it seems to be Japan's to win. You never know. That's why they wrestle the tournaments, and we'll see what happens. But, I think we should be, at least, contending for at least a second place spot. But I think we have work to do and we need to perform.
One of the things that I think the United States has an advantage here is that we're invested in the totality of the team. And so we're looking at it 10 deep. Let's try to develop every athlete to get the best performance possible. And then we have the national team that gets funding too. It's not where we want it to be, but I think with some of the other countries, like you're talking about with North Korea or maybe even Ukraine, you might have spots and you have to have great performances from the limited athletes that you may or may not send. So I always think that's to the United States' advantage. I would just love to see us continue that string because we've been in the best era for women's freestyle wrestling at the senior level the last quad. I'd love to just see that momentum continue. So I think a second place finish really keeps us on that trajectory because Terry Steiner has gotten better. He's built the team to this point where we're saying this is the best we've ever looked. I think it's important at some level to let that carry on in this 2025 season.
I think that is, the expectations. I would argue they're not like, conceding a championship either. A lot would really have to happen, both, positive for the U.S. and bad for Japan, on paper. But, you never know. And I think he's expecting, to be on the podium as a team and expect some very good individual performances. And, the weights where, maybe we don't medal. I mean, I can make an argument where we can, on paper, everybody on this team can contend for a medal. You and I went through it ourselves, and we kind of assigned our own little secret probabilities, in our mind. But everybody can contend for a medal, and some if they don't, it will just be part of the game of experience to set them up for future, medals, if not championships. I mean, everybody on this team is good.
As it relates to our neighbor, Canada, they had an incredible quad starting in 2008, finished second in 2008, second in 2009, third in 2010, second in 2011, and then fourth in 2012. Question is, what happened? And I don't want that to happen to the United States because they have fallen off. Is it funding? I've heard that you don't get funding to go to the Senior World Championships. You may have heard that they only sponsor Olympic weights, but I would love to see Canada get back to that point where they are contending for that second place spot with the United States.
Yeah, I mean, they had a golden era where they were just consistently tough, and not just, it was like in the World Championships, but even in, Pan Am's at pretty much age level as well, where you're looking, the first thing you're glancing at is, where's Canada? And they were very solid across the board. I don't know if it's a funding issue or not. My understanding, and we'll have to look into this. I believe for the senior worlds, I think the Olympic weights, they get funding at least. I don't know if they get salaries like, our national team, but I think at least their trips are paid for. I'm pretty certain that the non-Olympic weights don't get any funding and have to raise money. And they even in the non-Olympic years, they conduct the non-Olympic weights at like a separate trials, I believe. I don't even think they do it all at the same time. So clearly the non-Olympic weights are de-emphasized. It could be, obviously it seems like a funding issue. I don't know if it's a numbers issue. I don't really know what's going on, but the women in Canada were always just very solid top to bottom. When I first really started following senior women's wrestling, I'd say, in the early 2010s, 12, 13, they were really good. In 13, 14, 15, they're good, but you started to see them have more gaps in the lineup. And that's kind of how it started, where there's some weights they just weren't as good. And then then it's kind of fed on itself a little bit. So that's, to your point, I think perception is important and momentum is important. And, whatever the funding situation is in anything in life, really, it could be funding for a company. It could be for for sports, for a nonprofit. It is a momentum game. When people see you're doing good things and having good results and making tangible achievements, people want to be part of that. It's easier to raise money. When you start going the other way and people see you're slipping out, your performances aren't as good, people just lose interest. It's just human nature. Everybody likes a winner, and I think keeping momentum is very important.
Just as it relates to that, just imagine what it does to even win an individual national championship and to have that for your program. I've heard that where it sustains you. You get the visibility of someone that wins a championship, and now that program becomes relevant regardless of where that team places. And so look back to even 2019 when the United States had three world champions. None of the rest medaled. It was the only medals we had, but you had three world champions. You had Adeline Gray, you had Jakara Winchester, and you had Tamira Mensah-Stock. They now become stars as you can build around that. And I think that individual accomplishment that you have, I think that sets the stage for so much, Scott.
Oh, 100%. And, it's also kind of fun when you have like your core of like superstars. Like forever, it's been, obviously it was Adeline, Helen, Sarah, Jakara, and then all of a sudden you get the new rising superstars, the Kennedy Blades, Kylie Welker, Macy Kilty had a good run, Kayla Miracle had a good run, and then some of those people have ups and downs, and then you get another wave in now with, we'll see, it's still early, but, over time, I would expect very good things from, Audrey Jimenez, and, Rodriguez, and, we're going to see this next crop coming up. So, it's very important that at least you have some people that are consistently going to, contend for medals or win. And then you'll have these, the new faces will pop in and create, excitement around that core kind of nucleus of athletes that are always, that have been around the leaders.
And I think having an NCAA women's wrestling sanctioned product, I think that will help do that because now you get to say NCAA champion. And as we talked about, it doesn't really matter because it's still a national champion. Maybe winning the WCWAs was more difficult, but having that, yeah, it was because you had everyone. But having that designation, you just said it, perception is reality. When you say I'm an NCAA champion, your chest goes up and it's just a different perception.
Yeah, people know who it is. They do, and it puts it creates excitement, especially among laymen that may not know the nuances, right? So you're gonna hang that around your head. So it is a good thing we have that. Although, yeah, clearly the WCWA in its day was tougher. Had everybody. That was a good tournament.
But to explain, anytime you have to explain, I was
Yes,
an
I agree.
NCWWC champion. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah,
Over the course of time, it's built in the fabric. You know what NCAA means, and then your eyes perk up. Just like I was an
yeah.
Olympian. It doesn't matter what you did. You say Olympian. I think that in some people's minds, saying Olympian over world champion, it holds more credibility just because you know what it is.
We've debated that one as well. You and I. Yeah, I mean, I'll take the world champion over just
Sure.
a random Olympian to be, in my book. But to many people, the Olympian would be more impressive.
But look at take Olivia Shore, who has won two NCWWC championships. That puts Otterbein on the map. That's a Division III program. They have a national collegiate champion. That's going to elevate what they do. Now it's recognition. You're recruiting. We have a national champion. Her name's Olivia Shore. That's just going to feed into what they can do and the product they can build. So don't underestimate what that does for a program.
Yeah, I mean, you also take an athlete that you're recruiting. The first thing you say, well, one of the things an athlete will say and talk to the coach, can this program get me to my goals? And if you've never done it, you say, well, it's a leap of faith. I think this coach can. I think they could have partners. But when a coach says, hey, we have a champion. Look, we have Olivia Shore. We've done it. We know how to do it. It definitely gives you credibility, and it shows that it's not uncharted territory.
The World Class Athlete Program has goals, and they just hired Nate Engel as one of the assistant women's coaches. I don't know if that's the right designation, but he's part of the women's wrestling program with Bruce Robinson. They have stated publicly we want to have 6 members of WCAP on the Olympic team in the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics. I don't know if that's realistic, but I think it's
Is
good.
that counting the men or just the women?
Just the women. Just the women.
Not
So,
happening, but
yeah. But I like the line of
I like
thinking
it.
that they're going to do that. And you talk about funding. Abby Nettie said this. Why don't more people look into this? Because you get a full salary to compete with WCAP. I know there are restrictions on your life and what you can do and can't do, but I think it's a path that with Nate Engel going, the one thing I knew about Nate was he's great at building relationships. I knew that he was loved. I just don't know he was that loved because a lot of people were behind this and excited about him getting this role. I think this is great for Team USA and what we can do collectively as a product for women's freestyle wrestling.
Yeah, I mean, I can flat out tell you, Nate's a great coach and he's very loved. I know he's worked with my daughter. He's cornered her when she's been in some transitional situations, uh, cornered her, and very good. And we really like him. He's very well respected. A lot of people, whether it's Malvelti or Adeline was there. Skylar Grote. I mean, there was a lot of athletes that he's trained that have done very well. He's a student of the sport, exceptionally nice guy, great family, adorable kids, great wife. I mean, just a good person. I'm really happy for him. I think it's a good setup. Obviously, Bruce does a phenomenal job. And, WCAP, when you wrestle WCAP, in a match, they're going to know what you do. They're going to be well prepared. They're going to be you're going to be well scouted and they're going to be ready to go. And Bruce is very good at that. You and I have talked about Bruce's game planning. And now you add Nate, it just makes it that much, just adds a little icing on the cake. And, I mean, like Abby said, it's a great opportunity. I mean, everything has a price in life, right? And your price is your freedom a little bit. But, freedom meaning you can't just go where you want to go. You're in the army and they pay you but they also, own you. But that's good for a lot of people. A lot of people like that discipline and focus and support. I think the athletes are well taken care of there. It's, they've had success. Obviously, with Abby Nettie's made world team, and you have Janet Burkett. I mean, so you have, success there, and it's only going to build. I don't mean to when I say they're not going to have 6, it's not meant to be like a jab at them, but it would be very hard to fathom 6 people from any one given program based on just the apps, the you know, sick, just diversity in where people train and types of athletes in different situations. But I wish them best of luck. I think it's great. And I do think that program, for a lot of athletes, it's a great life decision. A lot of them really like it. And it gives you financial security, healthcare and all that. And it's a good situation. And, you're serving our country. And I am very supportive of our military.
In interviewing Nate for his new role and talking it through with him, it's the fascinating piece is how relationships with the coach and athlete translate into performance on the mat. And talking to Nate about that is so interesting because as it relates to corner coaching, and I saw it earlier this year where it was a ranking series event and there was an athlete that had a coach that she wasn't familiar with. And you can just tell she zoned out and wasn't locked into what that coach was saying because the relationship wasn't there. And he talked about how over the course of time you had to break through and make those breakthroughs to build a relationship. So when you're watching this match, it's more than just the actual competition and the scoring. There's this whole overlayer, this whole layer of things going on where there's the coach athlete relationship, how the athlete and coach work with the referee and how they interact with each other. So there's just all this setup that goes into it. And it really is a beautiful thing. And Nate really outlined what that relationship piece does in order to get the best out of the athlete.
Yeah. And obviously that relationship isn't just the time in the match. It's like, obviously you have all your preparation in the room and preparing and coaching, but it's like at the tournament, does the athlete want to have their headphones on and be utterly left alone? Do they want the coach to be following them around and banter back and forth and joke a little bit? What happens after the match? If an athlete wins a tough one, does the athlete want the coach right away to, give them, feedback? Do they want to be left alone if they have a tough loss? Is that coach capable of getting the athlete mentally, cleared out to move on in the repechage if it's available? Some tournaments athletes will default not want to wrestle on the backside, but you need to sometimes do that, or most of the time do it, because you need to be ready to have disappointment. It happens in a world championship or Olympics. You may have to, get your head in the game, to win a medal, or at a national championship, your team may need you on the backside. So that dynamic of how the athlete the coach remotivates the athlete, and what's said, it's a really complex situation. And the really good coaches, it's not like a one size fits all. A really good coach is chameleonic with the different athletes' needs and their personalities.
And Nate talked about that. He said you have 30 seconds in that break. What you're going to say to him, you can't be freaking out. And he said early on he may have freaked out on the referees, and the referees remember that so that they hold it against him later. So it's a dance, it's a psychology, all that you're playing in, and he's smart enough to know that. But as we've talked about in previous shows, if you're freaking out and just showing everything and you need to do this and you can't process all that information, it might be two or three things, breathe, get through it, and then you get them onto the mat. But everyone's different.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people like a little joke in the corner, not. And it's a nuanced dance with the referees. You can't tell me that some people that ride the referees, intimidate them and get calls. It's a dance, but you can't ride the referee. It's all subtlety. It's like anything in life. There's pros and cons. Things are relationships, and interacting with people is finesse. And the really good coaches to understand all these dynamics. And nobody's perfect. People lose their cool, make bad decisions. And there's a lot of pressure. We talked about this as well in the past. Throwing a brick is like, you talk about extreme pressure. You have to make a very well thought out mathematical decision in a split second, or an intuitive one.
As it relates, we talked about a Dan Gable story last week. Same thing. Lee Kemp was a three-time world champion, and he said he liked to warm up with just have the cool of the arena. He didn't like to be sweaty. He liked to just be in a singlet and have the cool. And a coach that didn't know Lee freaked out and said, "Lee, what are you doing? You got to warm up." And Gable saw it and said, "No, leave him alone. That's the way Lee gets ready." So he knew that intuitively just through time with Lee Kemp. It worked out for Lee. He's one of the all-time greats, but it's knowing what each athlete needs, even if it might not be the normal protocol of getting a good warm-up in. That's what worked for Lee Kemp.
Well, yeah, I mean, and ideally, and we've been in these situations personally. We have where something happens with either your normal coach isn't there, they have a conflict, or you're in a transition. And sometimes, you got to just grab somebody and say, hey, can you corner me for this tournament? And these are big tournaments, when you're talking about world team trials or things like that, US Opens. And, the really good ones kind of can adapt. Maybe they don't have all the past history in the time, but they can read people and also have seen. Most of these coaches have been around these athletes, whether it's at a national camp or seeing them at a tournament, or just watching them compete against their athletes, maybe. So they have some feel of like, how that athlete kind of rolls, but it's an art.
Women's W Cap got better. Team USA just got better with the hiring of Nate Engel, so happy about that. Scott, let's end with this. Sent you this, and it was from Nikki Macaluso, who is the mom of Sophia and Mia Macaluso. It was an article about back, I'm guessing it was in the 80s. It was about powder puff wrestling and just how it was a circus, a charade, and how they had a powder puff wrestling match during the boys and just how they wrote about it and how they disrespected it. I think it's important to look back at that and just see all of the steps and how far we've come to get to this point, that it was a sideshow, it was not respected, and that it took a lot of people early on in those days to fight through some barriers. And me, admittedly, too, I thought I was supposed to dislike it and not appreciate it and roll my eyes at it. Terry Steiner has said the same thing. He thought he was supposed to dislike it and think it was the worst thing ever. But thank goodness there's people that stayed the course, pushed through those barriers, and now we're talking about it in a way that it deserves.
Yeah, I mean, credit that, we've also, said this, the pioneers that they faced opposition and, and there still is, there's acceptance in many, many, many of the rooms. It's very well accepted. There are still situations where, some of the young ladies are not as comfortable, depending on a certain mentality of a coach or the community, perhaps. But I think by and large, the pioneers fought through that, and we've come a long way. And what won me on the sport was it wasn't just my daughter starting to wrestle at 13. It's, I just started to watch it a little more before that, before she actually had started wrestling. And the product itself really won me over. I mean, from the 2003 Worlds at the Garden, when I first saw women's wrestling, to just starting to watch it over the years, they just kept getting better and better. And, and now I just really believe it's a great product.
And then also got sent something about the U.S. Army trying to block women from wrestling, and then there was a lawsuit, and then they broke through, and now we have women wrestling in the Army, and it's part of it with Claire Bowie and Nikki's daughter Sophia. So it's fun to see the progress that's been made, but I think it's also important to know what they went through, and I always go back to what Tonya Verbeek said with the headline in the 2004 Olympics when women's wrestling came in. The headline was, "Oh, the scent of a woman."
I remember the one day we ended up, women's wrestling was on the front of like the Athens news, like front page of for the Olympics, and it was actually against it was with one of my competitors, Anna Gomez from France. And to be honest, it was a crazy picture, and however the highlight, or the bold statement was, "Oh, the scent of a woman." And it was like in a high crotch position or something of that effect. And it was like, okay, so that made me realize like people are just not used to this as much. This is something new. I was a little bit, ticked off about it, but at the same time, it's like, well, we're on the front page of the news. And so then, yeah, and then it was, we were on TV and like all these things that were new to us, and well, new to me especially, but new to the world of women's wrestling.
It's hard to believe 20 years ago they were still thinking that way and how far we've come. I mean, it's mind-blowing.
Absolutely. And it was, and it was not, and this is a key thing to understand, especially in the Army article, it was not without battles. I mean, that athlete was basically discouraged and had a fight for the right to get equal treatment, and just kept pushing, and didn't give up. Lawsuits were done. So, there was costs involved. There was, emotional energy, rejection. These battles were not easy. Okay, I'll be the first one. I'll have a team, and we'll get another couple of young ladies. No, it's some situations were fraught with immense resentment and difficulty that the Pioneers fought through.